Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a flag star placemat. With summer and barbecue season coming right up on us here, it's nice to have something that you can make to use for a picnic, use at home, give as a hostess gift. These placemats are really nice. It's just one floating point star block, a couple of strips here that match, and then some longer strips. That's the whole placemat. Here's another color variation, almost exactly the same, but I changed up the stripes just a little bit. I'll show you the sizes you need to cut for these pieces. Let me show you the pieces you need for the star block first. There's not very many pieces. It's pretty simple. So for the center of the star, you need a 3-inch square. For the backgrounds, these are light, you need a 3 by 2-inch rectangle. For the corners, 2-inch square. And for all the points, we're going to cut them 1 7/8 inches. So we're going to need 4 blue and 4 red, and that's for the points right here. So that's all the pieces you need for the patchwork. Then we just need the borders. The borders are cut 1 1/4 wide by 6 inches and 1 1/4 by 7.5 inches. The only other thing we need is these red and white strips. We need some 1 7/8 by 12, and we need some 1 7/8 by 19, and that's all we need for the whole placemat. All of my pieces are already cut because my husband Matt has cut these into a pre-cut kit, so you can buy one of those if you don't want to cut your pieces. But once you've got them cut, you need to mark the back of your star points. So we're going to mark right along the diagonal, and then we're going to be stitching right along the diagonal. So I've got a chalk pencil here, and just mark from corner to corner so that you can see your stitching line. I've got them all chalked. Let's take these to the machine and start sewing. So I'm going to start with the red ones. So you want to line up your red square with the corner of the rectangle. The red square is not as big. That's because we want it to float when we're done, and we're going to stitch right on that diagonal. I'm going to stitch right on the line. So I'm going right from corner to corner. Now normally I don't even mark the back of the squares. I've got my sewing machine marked. I've got a faint line on there. I use it so much that the line keeps getting worn off. I will just put the square on here, put the corner of this at the needle, and put the other end on the line. So I'll just swing that over till it's on my very faint line there, and that'll give me a nice straight line to stitch on. Now we're going to take these over to the ironing board, get them flattened out. I like to iron them flat, just the way you just stitched them, because it relaxes that thread, it relaxes the stitching line. Now we're going to fold this over in half. It's folding right on top of itself, and if you did a nice neat stitching line, those corners will meet, and then we're going to steam press it just a little bit. Once they're ironed and nice and flat, now we are going to open this up and we are going to trim off these 2 layers here. You can do it with your rotary cutter, I usually just use some scissors because the stitching line is straight. If I cut it kind of crooked here, it doesn't really matter. It's just the seam allowance being cut off. Leave about a 1/4 inch. That's what we need there. Now we're going to stitch the blue square onto here. So we are going to line up in the right lower corner and we're going to stitch along the diagonal. Same procedure that we just used. Do this on all 4 of them and then we will iron those as well. Again, iron them flat first. Now fold this over. Now you can see the points. Again, you want to trim off those extra layers in the back. Otherwise, the block just gets too bulky. Here's all the pieces we need for the block. Starting to look like a star. So we're just going to sew the rows and then sew the rows together. So let's put these on the outside of this guy. You're going to want to finger press these seam allowances. So the seam allowances are going to the outside. That's the way they naturally want to lay. So I'm kind of pulling it open and then drawing my fingernail down there. Now we're going to sew this row. Now I'm just going to do this middle row. I'm just using a 1/4 inch seam throughout. Everything matches up really well. Now we're going to sew the 2 rows together. You do want to match up all of your intersections, but since the seam allowances are going different directions, it's pretty easy to match them up. I've got both rows stitched on, and we're going to take it over and iron it. I like to iron this again with the seams still closed so that I can make sure that everything is flat before I open it up. Now we're going to press these seam allowances down. So it's kind of thick. It really helps if you finger press this hard first. A little bit of ironing, and then this one we want pressed up. So you have to really push them to the direction you want them to go. Push and flatten and then give it a nice press. And you can straighten and reblock, so to speak, as you iron here so that it's nice and square when you're done. Now we're going to put the little borders onto the block. Get these guys and then these guys. We're going to finger press these with the seam allowance going away from the middle. On these little teeny border pieces, it's real important to use a really accurate 1/4 inch seam. On the little pieces, if you're off just a little bit, it's really going to show up. It doesn't show as much on big pieces, but with the little ones, you want to be really careful and accurate. The block is now sewn, and I want to show you the points. This is called a floating point star. So these tips do not reach the borders. They're not supposed to reach the borders. It's very helpful then if your seam allowances are not perfect, you will never get the star points cut off. Also in here, again, it's not supposed to be going up to that intersection. A little bit of it is showing, and they're kind of overlapped, which is really pretty. Now we're ready to sew our stripes together. I'm just going to use 1/4 inch seams. They're all cut exactly the same length, so I'm just going to sew them all together. My strips are all cut on the lengthwise grain of the fabric. That makes it really easy to stitch them together and to get this pressed. I'm going to finger press these away from the light. So I'm just going to open this up, and I can push it really hard because it doesn't stretch because it's on the lengthwise grain. So this is just finger press, but you can see how flat it is. So the seams are pretty much going towards the dark. These are Stonehenge fabrics, and they're pretty thick, so I don't think we could see through them. But if you use a real light here, and your seam allowances are going that way towards the light, the dark might show through. So that's laying nice and flat, and now we're going to do our long strips. All these strips are sewn together now, and I finger pressed again towards the dark piece every time. And it's laying really pretty flat, so I'm not going to take it to the ironing board. I'm just going to sew this to this and this to this, then iron the whole thing. Again, it's really important to have your seam allowance really straight on this blue that's on the bottom here, because it's so little you can really tell if you've got it crooked. So once you've got it sewn, check from both sides. See if it looks nice and straight there. That does. So we will open this up, finger press towards the blue. Now we'll stitch this to this. The top is all done, and I've ironed it really flat. I find that if you iron it really flat, it makes the next step go easier. So I've got a piece of batting here, and I've got a backing, and we're going to use the flip method on this. I'm not going to use binding. I'm just going to put it front to back, leave an opening, stitch all the way around except for that opening. So we're going to pin a few times here, then we'll stitch it front to back. I'm going to sew around the edge using a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to leave an opening. So let's leave the opening at the bottom of the placemat here. So you want to have a real careful 1/4 inch seam all the way around, especially on the blue area here, so that your border around your star looks nice. I'm going to leave a big enough opening so I can get my hand in it, but small enough so I can get it stitched up neatly. So that's about right. Now let's take it over to the cutting table and trim off all this excess. We're going to trim off the batting and the backing so it's even with the top. And I usually use scissors for this because I can snip off the excess in the corners there near the stitching line. Makes it real easy. So I don't like to get out the rotary blade here. I just like to use the scissors. It's just easier. Now we're going to flip it right side out. So just put your hand between the top and the back here and turn it right side out. Once you've got it roughly right side out, you want to get the corners nice and poked out. So here's a technique I will use. I will put my thumbnail into the corner, and then I'm going to take my pointer finger from the inside, and I'm going to push with that. And that helps it get almost square. So again, take your thumb here, poke it in the corner, take your pointer finger on the same hand and poke it. Works really well. It's all flipped, but it's not very neat on the edges. It's hard to get these edges to lay really flat. So here's a method we will use to get those edges flat. Turn up the bottom a little bit so you've got a little bit of the top showing, maybe a 1/2 inch. And you can use the back of your fingernail to flatten that out. Now when you flatten it out and then put it back where it's supposed to go and press with your hands, that seam is going to go right on the edge. Let me show you on the other side. So just squish about a 1/2 inch up there. Feels very messy, but what's happening is the back has the batting up against it and it wants to press that way, and you can press this seam nice and flat. So we're pressing the seam open, then we're pushing it back in place and hand pressing it flat, and now that seam is right in the middle. So I'm going to do that all the way around, even on this patchwork side. It's a little bit harder on the patchwork side, but you can still get it nice and flat with the back of your fingernail, and then take your hands and press it flat. First step here is to get this opening closed. The neatest way would probably be to do it by hand, but I do almost no hand stitching, so I'm going to show you how to do this on the machine. I've finger pressed that opening at a consistent 1/4 inch. Now, we're going to sew from the back side, so I've put matching thread on. I've got blue thread on the top and I've got dark red in my bobbin. I'm going to start about a 1/2 inch beyond the opening, and I'm going to be very close to the edge of the placemat. Little back tack. Now you want to hold this with a little tension, and you want to turn your backing in at about a 1/4 inch. You can pin it if you want. Usually I just set it in place and sew. So keep that tension here with your right hand. I'm pulling a little bit. Then when you get to the end, back tack. All right, let's see how it looks. Once we iron it, you probably can't see it very well at all. Almost can't see it. Now we're going to quilt the top of the placemat a little bit. So I'm going to have to switch threads. So I've got blue on the bottom and I'm going to use red on the top. First thing I'm going to do is just stitch around here, and I'm going to put a couple of pins into the whole top so that things don't move much. It's a small piece. Things don't tend to move anyway, but I like to know everything's going to stay put. I'm going to go in the ditch right around here. So I usually will pin what I'm going to sew right at that time. I don't put all the pins in ahead of time, but just right where I'm going to go. So I'm going to start here. So to stitch in the ditch, you want your needle going, pretend this is the needle here. You want your needle going right in that seam. And you can feel if it's going to go on this side or this side of the seam, because whichever way the seam allowances are facing, your needle's going to go on the other side of that where it's less thick. So kind of open up with your hands, open up the seam and stitch right along the edge of the seam. We're going to pivot at the corner here. So you might want to feed it by hand. Now the reason I'm stitching this placemat in the ditch is because it's got a strong pattern and I don't want to put quilting all over it. Some of my placemats I will take to the long arm and quilt all over them, but this has got a lot going on already. So this stitching is going to be completely hidden. You won't even know it's quilted from this side. I've switched thread colors. Now I'm going to use a tan colored thread to match this background here. And I'm going to stitch around here. Now the reason I'm using tan is because I'm going to be stitching in the ditch, but it is going to be on this lighter colored section because my seam allowances are pressing away from that section. Same thing here. I'm going to actually be stitching on the tan part, so I don't want to use red thread because it might show. So now first let's go around here, then we'll do all the stripes. Let me show you how we do these long strips. Definitely back tack at the beginning, and I am holding this with tension. I'm pulling it as I sew. That keeps it straight, and it keeps the placemat really flat, makes it really easy to stitch in the ditch. So I'm stitching right up next to the red, but I'm stitching on the light. So even here I'm still pulling with this hand. All right, one more and I'm done.
Ready.
I've got the whole placemat quilted. Really turned out nice. Now you can't see the quilting, but I've quilted along every seam there. You can't even see the quilting on the back, but the placemat will hold together real well. Now these, you should use them. You should wash them, you should dry them, you should eat on them. They hold together really well. We use these every day and wash them all the time. Now this would make a great gift. You can use it outside, you can use it at a picnic, and they're just really fun for a lot of holidays. A lot of holidays you can use these Americana prints for. Thanks for watching our tutorial today. Happy quilting.